This is a constant mesh gearbox. It's an accurate representation of how power transmission happens in manual transmission vehicles. To put it more accurately, they're more commonly found in modern manual transmission vehicles, since older manual transmission vehicles use what was called a sliding mesh gearbox. And I explained what a sliding mesh gearbox was in a previous video, so go and watch that if you want to. This model contains 3 shafts: the clutch shaft, counter shaft, and main shaft. The clutch shaft serves as a direct source of power input for the gearbox. In the case of car, there would be an engine supplying this gearbox, but in the case of my gearbox, there's going to be my hand which is turning this crank. The clutch shaft always rotates with the clutch gear. The main shaft, on the other hand, holds the first, second, and third gears which do not rotate with the main shaft, each having their own speeds. There are, however, 2 dog clutches that do rotate with the main shaft and are free to move horizontally from side to side. Overall, the main shaft serves as the system's output. Lastly, there's the counter shaft, which serves as a bridge between the clutch and main shaft. It contains 4 counter gears that all rotate with the shaft, therefore they're all sharing the same rotational speed. Note that all the gears in the entire system is not free to move from side to side, making all partner gears constantly in contact, in other words, constantly meshing, which is where this gearbox got its name, the constant mesh gearbox. So you can see a clear difference in rotational speed between the first, second, third, and fourth gears. And I'll cover that in just a bit, but even though there's a power input, that doesn't mean necessarily that there will be a power output, as demonstrated here. That's because the system is in neutral. And the only way to get out of neutral is to shift into gear using these dog clutches. You've probably noticed the side teeth on both sides here, and those will be used to connect the gears which also have the side teeth. And doing that will cause the dog clutch to pick up the speed of the gear which is connected to, giving the system a power output. Right now the system is in first gear, the lowest speed setting, but it also has the highest torque setting. We can simply shift into second gear by sliding the dog clutch across, which will increase the speed output but decrease the torque output. To shift into third gear, we should disconnect the dog clutch from second gear, going back into neutral, then moving the other dog clutch into third gear. The speed will once again increase, the torque will once again decrease, and you will have seen a relationship between the two by now. That is that rotational speed is inversely proportional to torque, meaning that as one increases or decreases, the other will do the opposite. So when we shift into fourth gear, we'll know that it's the fastest setting with the lowest torque. And you'll also notice that the input is of equal rotational speed with the output, giving fourth gear a gear ratio of 1:1, which is fast in comparison to the first gear, which has a ratio of 6:1. So when we're in first gear, every 6 input rotations would only give us 1 output rotation. And I'll display the other gear ratios of all the other settings on the screen right now. But how can we find the gear ratio between 2 gears? Well, we can do that by using this formula that states that the gear ratio is equal to the number of teeth on the output gear divided by the number of teeth on the input gear. For simplicity's sake, I'll label the gears using letters. And we'll solve for how to get the gear ratio between gear A and D. By first zooming in on gear A and B, gear A will be the input with 15 teeth and gear B the output with 45 teeth. Simply plugging in those numbers will give us a ratio of 3:1. Moving to the side, we'll now solve for the gear ratio between gear C and D. Gear C is the input with 20 teeth and D the output with 40 teeth. Using the formula once again, reveals the gear ratio as 2:1. Zooming back out, the input speed is reduced by a factor of 3 between gear A and B. That reduced speed is then further reduced by a factor of 2 between gear C and D. So the input speed was divided by 3, then by 2. Therefore, the output is 6 times slower than the input, which is how we know that the gear ratio of the first gear setting is 6:1. Now, maybe you're asking, what if we wanted to change the main shaft into the input and the clutch shaft into the output? Then in first gear, we would get an opposite ratio, that being a ratio of 1:6. For every 1 rotation of this shaft, we would get 6 rotations in the output shafts. And this is what it looks like. And you might not notice it by watching on the screen right here, but I'm using a lot more rotational force to turn this main shaft as opposed to the clutch shaft. And that's of course because I said that the main shaft has more torque in this setting. If you want to calculate and prove the other gear ratios of the other settings, I'll put the number of teeth on the screen right now for all the other gears. Otherwise, that's all I gotta say about this constant mesh gearbox in this video. I hope I taught you something new, and if it's your first time here, welcome. My name's Aaron, and this is the sort of thing I do. I study engineering, design mechanical models, then I go on to teach about them right here on YouTube. I'll see you next time, and goodbye.